Hello. We'll get started as we see people coming on in. All right, I'm going to stop share for just a moment. There they are. Hello, everyone. As you guys are coming in, I'm just rearranging my slides. I thought I had everything lined up. All right. Oh, that looks like a beautiful classroom. I don't know whose classroom that is, but that is Chicago. That looks really pretty. All right. But you guys can still see the main slide, correct? As I played with things and moved things around. Okay, good. Hi, welcome. Glad you guys are here. I see you waving, Val. Waving back at you. It's my limited view on here. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Katie Dufford Melendez. I am a manager of state affairs with the National Head Start Association. I am thrilled that we have Joshua Harris from Voices for Healthy Kids here. I'm really excited about his presentation. I've been to their training before and love it, and I'll probably brag on it a little bit more. Again, welcome. Glad you guys are here. And I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving. So before we get started, just to give you a little heads up about NHSA and who we are. Again, I'm so sorry. I'm going to stop again. I keep losing my slides. I apologize. Not sure what I'm doing wrong here, but please bear with me for the technical difficulties. We just had them going. You all can see my slides, correct? So please forgive me. We had it all set up. All right. So NHSA's mission is to be the untiring voice that will not be quiet until every vulnerable child is served with the Head Start model of support for the whole child, the family, and the community. We work diligently for policy changes that ensure that all vulnerable children and families have what they need to succeed. Our mission is to coalesce, inspire, and support the Head Start field as a leader in early childhood development and education. And we do that by encouraging one powerful, united Head Start voice. We work to create a collegial and collaborative Head Start field, build nonpartisan support for an increased federal commitment to Head Start. And also just to let you know that kind of where we are with early Head Start. There's an urgent need to raise early Head Start, given that only 1 in 10 income eligible children have access to early Head Start. And this is a far greater need than Head Start, which reaches an estimated 1 in 3 income eligible children. So there are 500,000 fewer children served in early Head Start than Head Start. And so while we want to preserve access to Head Start's preschool services, we also have to focus on raising early Head Start. And as part of this work, we have created the Early Head Start Rising. It is our advocacy program to ensure that more children have access and pregnant people have access to our early Head Start services. And there's 3 main focus areas for our work. First, we raise awareness for early Head Start among our stakeholders. Second, we support a strong community of practice so that Head Start community can deliver the model as it grows in its importance. And third, we organize advocacy efforts to build support for early Head Start, much like what we're doing here with our partners. And when a lot of this work started, we created this advocacy toolkit. We'll make sure that we put the link to the toolkit here. I'm not going to go back through a lot of this because we spent about a half of a year last year providing this training repeatedly to make sure everyone had the basics and the foundations. But I did want to just quickly mention that this toolkit is available online, and Courtney will make sure she gets that chat in there, or I will in just a moment. And in that toolkit, you'll find a link to the entire webinar so you can get that training. There's frequently asked questions, there's early Head Start facts and figures, there's suggestions for social media posts. But today we'll review a couple of those key pieces from the advocacy training so that way it engages your memory a little bit, and that way you're ready for Joshua's presentation, because he's just really going to open up a lot of those fields for you. So I've been through their training. It's phenomenal and it's incredibly insightful. So let's take a look at some of the key concepts from the original training, and then we'll move forward with the new one. So if you went through the first one, you learned about the core messaging components. We talked about the importance of your overview for your goal for your messaging. We talked about understanding your need and making sure that you're able to communicate that and give it the why for your audience members. And we also talked about providing your vision and determining the how. And then I know, Joshua, I don't know if you had gone through this either, but we talked a little bit in our training about a secret sauce. And in our secret sauce, we talked about messages that resonate with children, about children, and a sense of urgency. So that way we would have a message that, that will resonate with others. And some of the messages we talked about were the importance of early brain development and the impact on the quality early child care and education. We talked about maternal and child mental and physical health. We talked about that all children need a strong start in life. We talked about that being an equity issue for us. And we talked about that kids are essential and our priority. And we talked about that infants and toddlers are our highest priority. And then finally, we talked about 4 main audience members. They were policymakers, business leaders, parents and families, nonprofits and agencies. And we looked at what they valued and messages that would speak to them. So in the coming months, we're going to do these partner trainings throughout the year coming. And our thought is that these messages and helping you to understand who your core audiences are and your key messages are going to help. So today, when you hear from Joshua, you're going to hear about our policymakers and how what we say to them matters, and understanding when there's common ground between us, because really in the end, all of us want what's best for kids. We want quality care and education. We want to make sure that children have the best start, all of the messages that we just talked about. So it is my pleasure to introduce Joshua Harris. He's a senior manager of marketing and communications with the Voices for Healthy Children, Healthy Kids. And I'm going to turn it over to him. And yeah, so Joshua, thank you for being here and welcome. And I'm going to make sure that I get this talking box out of the way. And you go ahead and tell me when to advance. And I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the work of my boss, Allison Frazier, who's unable to join us today. She's a little under the weather, but we are excited to do this for you all and offer this training and any potential further future trainings that can go more in depth and more in detail about any of the range of topics that we cover in our work around the prenatal to 3 space. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Joshua Harris, and I am joining you from Baltimore, Maryland, which sits on the land of the Piscataway and Susquehannock people. I encourage you to learn about the original stewards of the land that you live on. And welcome to this overview on advancing prenatal to 3 conversations and building relationships, having productive conversations with decision makers. Voices for Healthy Kids is an initiative of the American Heart Association, and we work to advance equitable policies that make the places where babies, toddlers, and kids and families live, learn, and play healthier. I am the senior manager of marketing communications for Voices for Healthy Kids, and we also run the NCIT, which is the National Collaborative on Infants and Toddlers, and you can visit that at ncit.org as well if you're interested in finding more about that work or becoming a member of the collaborative, which we'd love to have you. And on the next slide, if you can advance for me, I'd like to also say, as I introduce myself, that as this, one of the things that I value most is partnership. And doing this work, I feel excited. As a father of an 18-month-old, it's exciting to not only do this work and figure out how it can assist and help others to advocate on the behalf of policies that impact our children, but it's impacting my life directly as I learn to navigate the spaces. And so I just introduced myself in a very specific way, touching on my values and feelings about this work. And so this is kind of a preview of some of the things that we'll share today. And I encourage you to pause here to think about your own values. Think about how this work of talking with decision makers makes you feel and why it's important to you. What are some of the things that you value and makes this work critical in your mind? In the next half hour, I'll take you through a brief introduction of a new resource, a guide on training, guide and training to support advocates working on prenatal to 3 policies. This work came out of requests from advocates in our network, helping to customizing messages and policy asks, especially for when working with decision makers in conservative states for this specific guide. We'll share some of our research, our messaging, and our audience strategy to help you better understand how we developed the frame. We're also offering something else something that we're hearing is pretty unique and urgently needed is support for advocates to find common ground with conversations and with conservative decision makers in a non-polarizing and physiologically safe way. You'll hear about some of that later, but in other words, this means being smart in our strategy and smart in how we maintain our passion for this work and our compassion for everyone's basic humanity. It's about doing our best work while still taking care of ourselves. And in the current polarized and polarizing political atmosphere, it's easy sometimes to feel depleted and to turn against one another or feel hopeless. And so we need to make sure that we're taking good care of ourselves and our colleagues in order to prevent burnout and isolation. We have to make sure that we're taking care of each other and taking care of ourselves as we do this work. I've worked with some of you before and others have not worked with you. And I suspect most of you are nodding and we see you and the power and the weight of the work that you're doing on your shoulders. And we hope that this resource that we're sharing and that you've seen posted in the chat is helpful to you. In addition to our brief overview, there's a full set of resources. Next slide, please. There's a full set of resources available to you as well, and we'll share links at the end. The online guide has the detailed content and exercises on everything we'll discuss, on everything that we'll discuss today and more. You can take a full training. You can even join a community of practice to work on some of these strategies and tactics. The Voices for Healthy Kids staff can help also provide technical assistance for any projects or initiatives that you're working on and support you through that. Our work is only beginning. As capacity for funding allow, we will add to our library of offerings and the trainings that we can provide to you. Projects are chosen based on real world requests, so based on what's needed in the work that you all are doing in the field and on the ground. So please dive in. If there's something else that would help, please don't hesitate to ask. And so we hopefully will be able to look forward to doing more trainings for you in the future. Next slide. All right, so we want to talk about the archetypes. So this research and resource focuses specifically on conversations with decision makers in conservative states, where advocates are feeling the most opposition, if you will, in the PN3 policies. Eventually, we hope to expand our research to strengthen conversations with all decision makers so that we can understand and find common ground with all of decision makers, but this is just the start and the types of conversations and issues with those in conservative states. Our first goal was to more deeply understand this group of decision makers and specifically the values that needs that they have that inform their policy work and their decision making. And so because there's no one type of conservative decision maker, we developed and built our own out 4 archetypes, which are typical examples of a person or group. Those archetypes enable us to explore more specific ways of approaching prenatal to 3 policy. There's detail in the guide about our methodology, but briefly, we developed the archetypes using existing research, input from people holding both conservative and progressive viewpoints, and with advocates working on PN3 issues in conservative states, and interviews with elected officials. The archetypes that we defined are church and country, economic influence, legacy Republican, and populist. And before we share more details, I want to reinforce our commitment to this work is to do it without stereotype or judgment. Instead, we focus on understanding the feelings, the needs and core values within each archetype to help you advance productive debate and discussion. We all come from this, come to this from various places on the political spectrum, and we hope it will be as helpful to those of us who see ourselves reflected in the archetypes and those that don't. Really quickly, definitions. The definition of an archetype is
sorry.
Oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I was moving. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
No, you're fine. The definition of an archetype is a very typical example of a certain person or thing. The definition of a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular person or thing. Where stereotypes can reduce people to a simplistic idea in order to shut down curiosity and openness, archetypes give us examples of people who may hold similar values, views and values in order to increase an understanding about their background. You can use the archetypes as part of your analysis to decision makers, helping you and your coalition or organization to determine who you will meet with, who the right people are to attend the meeting, and what information you'll share. Of course, adding your own homework on specifics, which will be important to really advancing productive conversation and discussion. Let me briefly introduce you to the archetypes, and you'll find much more detailed in the online guide. The first one we'll talk about, and then we can go to the next slide, is church and country. These individuals typically are loyal to chosen leaders, deeply influenced by conservative interpretation of Christian values and a moral approach. They believe they're called by faith to help others and to be protector of constituents and community. Believe churches and communities already have sufficient resources to help people, and they take pride in position earned. And so there is an expectation that others should work hard for what they desire in life. And at the same time, there's a sympathy for those in poverty, especially in rural areas. They often value faith, authority, tradition, control, as well as care. The next one we're going to talk about is economic influence. This group is typically highly educated and financially secure. These decision makers prioritize the economy and business, strength, and favor limited government. They're passionate about discussing the details of policy, especially the data and numbers supporting it, in order to fully understand costs, benefits, and return on investment. This group favors limited government, believing that the public sector alone is inefficient and ineffective for solving problems. The values often include freedom, individual choice, control, as well as the family unit and its freedom, which is essential. It can be helpful to show how proposed solutions remove barriers for families to maximize their own personal choice when having conversations with these types of decision makers. The next one is the legacy Republican. This decision maker is driven by traditional values of hard work and the American dream, if you will. They represent the legacy Republican archetype. They value debate and interested in other points of view. They are open to stepping out of party lines, and they're often passionate about policy details. Their values include diligence, care, service, and leadership. The next archetype and final one that we'll discuss is populist aligned. These decision makers value individuals making efforts to advance themselves without outside help or government spending. They're led by their constitutional ideals, representing the populist aligned archetype. Note that instead of simply using the term populist, we use populist aligned. This distinction is important because populists tend to be working class and have lower levels of academic completion. In contrast, populist aligned are often decision makers who make concerted effort to appeal to populists while they themselves are often not from that background. They value individual efforts. There's resentment towards people who are not perceived who have rightfully earned their benefits. This group believes that society does not need to make things fair for everyone. Their values are loyalty to America, diligence, and freedom. Of course, even with this more detailed look at conservative decision makers, no one fits neatly into one or the other. So the guide also includes insights that hold true across all of the archetypes, including the strength of freedom as an overarching value. The very strong sentiment that people have an individual responsibility to take care of themselves and their families, and the fact that conservatives often feel judged and villainized by progressive advocates, which, as you can imagine, doesn't set up a very helpful open conversation. And so the guide also gives us dials or ways to get more specific within each archetype. You can think of ways to turn up or down a specific characteristic within an archetype based on a person's age, where they live, their life, or their experience. You can go to the next slide.
I'm on shared beliefs. There's the dials. Do you want
Yeah.
here finding common ground?
Yep.
Okay.
They're good. So now we want to talk briefly about non-polarizing communication and supporting your needs. I think it's important to enter these conversations using non-polarizing communication. This project is different from many other message guides because it incorporates non-polarizing communication, which is an approach to finding common ground during challenging conversations while also taking care of yourself and your team members. A really effective way to find common ground, even when two people seem to be worlds apart, is to connect on the level of our common humanity. That means rather than focus on opposing strategies, we focus on hearing and identifying feelings, needs, and core values that the other person is expressing. This new way of listening allows us to understand and underlying motivators and not just get stuck on specific strategies of the right or wrong way. There may be a part of you that wants to find common ground and a part of you that feels frustrated and angry because you can't feel free to bring up things that you're extremely passionate about, such as direct facts about structural racism. Non-polarizing means rather than falling into a them and us scenario, we speak and listen from a place of curiosity because we want to understand where we can make a bridge between our core values and those of another person whose stance seems very different than our own. And it means staying connected to our own feelings, needs, and core values throughout this process. The guide outlines several ways you can practice staying open and curious and find common ground without surrendering what you hold most dear. The guide and training addresses three interconnected channels of this work. The content research and strategy are what we might call the head or the thinking channel. Right slide, you're right on time. The head or the thinking channel. Feelings and relationships are what we might call the heart or feeling channel. And the bigger compassion and needs to hold it all, compassion for ourselves, for others, and for overall vision of healthy children and families, we might call this our gut or our intuition channel. For conversation. Feeling, thinking, and sensing, when brought together, bring a deep understanding of navigating every type of situation. We're wired to use these three different types of perception all together. And when we do, our inner compass gets activated and it keeps us aligned with our values and our purpose or the passion that drives us for this work. When we don't activate our inner compass by checking in with our feelings, needs, and values, we can sometimes feel stuck and get a hopeless sense or get depressed. The online guide and full training offers simple methods for regaining clarity and composure using non-polarizing language to build bridges, as well as self-care, so you can stay fully present and be at your best, knowing that your values are also being considered in the way that you communicate. The guide gives us a 4-step process that you can use alone or with your team. Number 1, learn to replace blaming language with feelings or feeling words. 2, learn to apply the idea in conversations with decision makers. So replace that blaming language and then practice applying that in conversations with decision makers. Number 3, practice translating statements from decision makers into feeling, need, and value statements. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you feel this way, or you need this way, or this is a value that you cherish. And then number 4, a role play to prepare for these conversations. Practice, practice, practice. You can never have enough practice in preparing for these conversations. The online guide gives us pointers for using your intellect, emotional intelligence, and tuition or gut feelings to build bridges and find common ground. Take a look at the need, values, and feelings list in the guide. All right, here we go. Core needs, great. Needs. There are fewer than 20 core needs that all human beings share. What we all need in order to thrive and flourish and reach our potential and feel fulfilled. When a core need is met, we feel some sort of happiness or relaxation. When a core need isn't met, we feel some form of unhappiness or unease. Values. Our values are not something we're born with. They are choices we make based on our personality, our beliefs, our cultural environment, and our life circumstances and goals. Adhering to your values keeps you grounded in integrity with yourself. Our values can change over time, and how we prioritize them often changes. Feelings. When needs are met or not met, feelings are ultimately the result. You want to stay in your body. It will inform you what's going on way before your head can make sense of things. This is a new way of paying attention for most of us, and it takes practice. And it's well worth it. Once we know how to activate our inner compass and hear someone's underlying feelings, needs, and values, then we can see where do we align. Even if our strategies seem opposing or to be contradictory to each other, it will build a bridge between our common humanity, and from there, we can negotiate based on our common ground. A doorway it appears in what used to look like a brick wall. We encourage you to use the information and exercises in the guide online to build your skills on your own or with your team and with your coalition to really understand needs and values. Next slide.
I have putting it all together. Is this where you want to be?
Oh, yeah. Messages. Yes, here we go. All right. The final piece of the guide and training is to set PN3 messages. We started with existing messages, message research, and there's a lot of good work out there. We explored those messages in interviews with elected officials, and then used what we learned and adapted those messages to offer specific pivots for the archetypes. On this slide, you'll see the core messages. These are the core messages. You can read them, starting with every child deserves an opportunity to get a strong start in life. From the guide, I can see if I'm talking with someone who fits into church and country archetype, I know they probably strongly support two-parent mom and dad households where mom stays home in the early years. So I might acknowledge that the strong start may include parents staying home if they choose to, and the environment supports their ability to do so. From listening, I may learn that their idea of their faith requires helping others, but they believe that churches and communities already have resources to help people. So I might acknowledge these resources in your community and how they might need more support or partnership with state, or even better yet, bring one of their leaders with you. An important note about the messages is wrapping everything we've been discussing, right? Tying it all together. Thinking about who carries the message is just as important as what you say. Who is best able to connect with and relate to the elected's lived experience and perspective? Who will be safe or potentially unsafe in this conversation? The guide includes tips on working with your coalition to determine that approach. Next slide. Please go deeper and wait. All right. So now, if you would like to go deeper to apply this work, as we mentioned before, you can visit the online guide of the website, and you can attend a more detailed training, or join a community of practice, or request technical assistance from Voices for Healthy Kids. We're integrating this approach across more of our work, including the next phase of discussing the threats of preemption and protecting local solutions in decision-making through the archetypes in non-polarizing communication. And so we'll have that coming in the coming months here in 2023. And so, is there another slide after this? I think this is it. Yeah, this is the last slide, and we've posted all of the links in the chat. And what I like to do, though, is open up the opportunity for questions, because I know I went through a lot, and there may be questions around the archetypes and what that looks like. And I like to open the floor to hear from you, or hear some experiences that some of you may have had with working with or having meetings with elected officials that you felt were on the opposite end of the spectrum and may have had trouble advocating for prenatal to 3 policies. Do we have any questions from anyone?
Let's give it go ahead.
So far, we haven't received any questions in the chat, but I have allowed people to unmute themselves. So please feel free to unmute and ask your questions.
I'm interested in what how people are receiving those archetypes. I found them fascinating. I thought they were done in such a non-judgmental way. I know when I approach not even just lawmakers, but even people in my world that maybe don't always view things the same way I do, or I have a tendency to be defensive and not understand maybe their views. And I felt like going through your training, I was more open to realizing and reminding myself that we're all coming from a good place for the most part. Like, I think 99% of the people really want what's best for kids, and those that don't, I don't even know who that 1% would be, but I was fascinated by that work, and it helped me really, even in my daily interactions in my community, to be a little bit more open and show a little more grace when I'm dealing with folks. I'd be curious if anyone else looked at those archetypes and thought, gosh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think that's really the important part of the non-polarizing component, is really us being able to hear and understand, right? And an example that I often use is, you can say that you believe that we need to fund universal pre-K because you believe it creates equity and a level playing field for everyone to have an opportunity for the best possible education, which is one way of having that conversation. But if someone is going to support a policy for advancing or pushing for universal pre-K because they believe that we need to compete globally, and in order to compete globally with other countries, we have to make sure that our American children have the earliest start in education. And that's what's going to get them to push for and fund a policy. As long as we get it done, that's the goal, right? And so really understanding that there's just different values that people have is important to that conversation, and finding that common ground, which is getting the policies pushed through.
I was trying to read if there are any conversations in the chat. And is there anybody here that that maybe is in a conservative state that feels like this might help you in how you view your decision makers?
Was anyone, I'd also like to ask, was anyone confused around the 4 archetypes, or had questions around like where they may intersect? I know that the populace aligned one is one that we often get questions about, and are really understanding the intersectionality between that and the other 3 archetypes. Anyone have any questions around that?
Hi, I'm in Texas, so you can imagine, how some of that goes across. Though we're in a large city, so we tend to be more blue than the rest of the red state. but yeah, archetypes, I was kind of envisioning where some of them intersect or they cross over. As an example, your legacy Republicans. A lot of the so-called legacy Republicans, which are more true conservative, then there's those Republicans that are more Trump follower, and they tend to be way more conservative. They're the ones that are winning the primaries and being elected to office, while the legacy Republicans are being more in the minority in that party. So I can see where there's some crossover as to even the Republicans themselves are now kind of like broken into different archetypes themselves. So like I said, but I did find that interesting. Your archetypes are kind of,
Yeah,
they're
I think
understand. I understand them. They make sense. But at the same time, I think we need to realize sometimes there's crossover as to in those archetypes themselves.
yeah, I think it's that's really a great point. And what we've seen, specifically, you have legacy Republicans, which people would say is a traditional or someone like a John McCain who was willing to cross party lines with something he believed was right. And then you even have some cases where we have someone that I would consider an economic influencer, Republican, like a Mitch McConnell, but who's used populist language to rally a base and to move and motivate people to show up and turn out, whether it be to the polls or for specific actions, right? He himself isn't a populist, but he's used the language to cross over. And we've seen that with some of the legacy Republicans as well, because we've seen the populist move and grow in the last few years. And so they may not themselves fall into that category, but they've used it as a rallying cry and have used those talking points, if you will, to cross over to a different archetype. Do we have any other questions?
I had one that surprised me. I thought was really great was the church and country, because I question sometimes. I'm like, gosh, if you're so faithful, I don't understand why maybe you don't want to push these policies or support this program. And the aha moment for that one for me was that the resources are within the community and within the different churches to be able to meet the needs of that local community. And I thought that was a really interesting aha moment for me. And then I thought, going back into my old world, I used to work in a very conservative community serving migrant farm workers. And so sometimes I felt like there was this disconnect and I didn't always understand it. But that was an aha moment for me to realize I'm leaning the wrong way in my community. I need to really lean in on the churches who want to do well by the families that are working within their community and do more community-based organization work rather than maybe school district focused work. And so I thought that was for me, that was an aha moment.
Yeah, and not only that, but a critical point in understanding church and country is also the loyal to their chosen leaders. And in that group, we're taught to pray for our leaders, no matter who they are, and to support them. And so if a leader has chosen not to go with certain policy, that kind of falls in, even if they believe that it's something that should be pushed. If the leader has made a decision and that's a chosen leader, they're very loyal to those chosen leaders. And so that's important distinction to really understand going into these conversations. And this is, again, as we explained, kind of a top level introduction, and the training is more detailed, but more importantly, as you have meetings with some of these leaders, you'll have to do your own research in advance, right? To know, and it's things that are simply findable on Google, on social media, to better understand a little bit more and to try to get a grasp of the value system of the individual that you're going to be meeting with. That's important. And so it'll be important for you to practice and kind of identify where they may fall on the spectrum. And I think it'll be easily identifiable when you look at kind of how and what they've posted on social media, statements that they may have made in the press. You'll really begin to better understand what their value systems is, and use that to advance the conversation.
Certainly.
Do we have any other questions?
I don't necessarily have a question, but if I could just comment, I've been sitting here chomping at the bit, and it took everything I had not to get into this. I mean, I think in a nutshell, I think you've done a great job in presenting this. I think it all boiled down to knowing your audience. And we went through this with the last reauthorization of Head Start. And we were spending so much time on people who already were aligned with what we were doing. And I remember, and just give me a second to tell you this, we were at the young senator from Illinois' office, and we went to him and we said, look, guy, we need some support for this. He said, guys, come on, you're wasting your time with me. You know, you need to go over to talk to Shelby or Sessions and Lamar Alexander and those guys who are very more conservative, you know, and get them on board. So what I did was I went directly from there to Sessions, Senator Jeff Sessions' office. He's a senator from Alabama. And I too from the South. So, you know, I understand, Southern vernacular, if you would. So went in and talked with the gentleman. And of course, I'm not from Alabama, so he's not really going to listen to me, right? And so I had to have a few people call the office while I was there. Then he would listen to me because he realized that I knew people in his state and I had antennas or roots, if you would, in his state. And so he listened to me. And I was giving him this pitch about how we need to continue to have parents' involvement in the process of Head Start and how it was, something good. And so as I looked around his office, I saw a picture of a little girl. Now understand the people we're trying to get now to come on board are people who are not grandparents, right? There's nothing that they wouldn't do for a grandchild. So when I asked him, I said, wow, I said, well, who's this? He said, that's my grandbaby. And I saw him light up, And at this time, the buzzwords were things like family values. And of course, we hold those dearly and less government in what we were doing. And so I was looking at the picture, and he began to tell me the story about the young girl. And I said, wow, but there's nothing you wouldn't do for her. He said, I'd move mountains for her. I said, wow. I said, this is what we're trying to do for the kids in Head Start, and parents need to be at the table. I mean, don't you agree that they can make better decisions about their kids than government can? So if we're taking them out of the process, don't you think we're undermining our family values? And he was like, it changed for him then. He said, young man, come go with me. He then took me across the hall to his colleague, Shelby, Senator Shelby, and we had a conversation with them. And then the two of them, of course, went to Lamar Alexander, who was over the Help Committee at the time. And then when I heard from my leadership, they were like, hey, when we saw that young senator from Illinois again, he was like, what in the world did you guys tell him? What did you do? What did you say to him? Because he realized there had been a shift in how they thought. And so the whole thing was to keep parental involvement, because some staff thought that too much parent involvement kind of undermined the ability to manage programs well, because they thought they came with limited resources. But nonetheless, it was all about knowing the audience, knowing the buzzwords, knowing the language, and being able to convey them to that in a way, because they too, it's hard to say no to children. It's hard to say no to children. And so regardless of whether you're conservative or liberal, children are hard to say no to. So again, just knowing your audience and what they value, I think you did a great job in presenting that this evening. And those are the keys to really opening those doors to get the support that we need for programs such as Head Start and Early Head Start.
That's a really great example. Thank you for that and for sharing that with us. It's a perfect example, because oftentimes we can go into conversations and we're so passionate, and this is the work that we do, and it's the right thing to do. So we want them to support it. And we don't think about like where their values lie, and we want to just lay it all out there because this is the right thing to do. And so that's a perfect example of how to identify a commonality or common ground and connect it to someone's lived experience, right? That's a really, really great example. Thank you for sharing that with us.
And I also heard what I heard you say multiple times, Joshua, is the common humanity, right? You saw the picture of their granddaughter, you saw exactly what they valued and what was most important, and then spoke to that. And then also, I hate to say, I also heard some other parts of the values, parents and parental choice and putting parents back in power. And those were all the, like you said, the buzzwords, the key concepts that that lawmaker valued. I think that was a beautiful example. And I need to come learn more from you.
Do we have any other questions or questions about the links, any of the links that were shared? And please do feel free to go into the training module and the full guide to really better understand, really dive into the archetypes. This is really a really brief preview and a look into, but there's so much more inside that guide. And if you or your organization is interested, please feel free to send us a message. I'll put my email in the chat for you. We'd be happy to do a presentation or training or answer any questions that you have. We're here to offer technical assistance as well.
I was also struck by a lot of the common language that you all used in our, and a lot of it I'm sure has to do with our PN3 network and working so closely together. But you know, that now is the time for children and making sure that we meet their needs and giving everybody a head start. And so I appreciated that common message. So we have a couple of choices. We've got about 15 minutes. We can continue discussing a little bit further. I can let you guys have 14 minutes back in your day, or we can look at some of the graphics that Head Start and HSA is put together. And I think what we probably could do is also, as you guys remember, in our toolkit that we put at the very beginning, you can see those graphics there. I'm getting a message saying we should probably let it go, and that way, because it might be a longer activity than the time we have. So in the toolkit at the very beginning, you guys have tons of information between Voices for Healthy Kids, and there, again, I really encourage you to go through that document that they have, their trainings. They have, I don't know, where there's 7 modules. I can't remember. I went through them. I found them fascinating. And then also our advocacy toolkit we put at the very beginning. That'll give you some talking points for early Head Start and Head Start, so that way we can increase our mission as well to serve more pregnant people, infants, and toddlers. Any other questions before we end the session? Well, I really appreciate you all being here. Joshua, thank you so much. Again, I'm a huge fan, obviously. I feel like I'm a little fangirling over here because you guys opened my eyes, and I hope made me a little bit more open to people, and I appreciate that a lot. So.
Thank you. Happy to be here. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you all. Have a beautiful day.